back here in the auditorium at Extreme Events. This is the session about on-premise, cloud or hybrid. So now we are talking about technology. It's a technical deep dive. I'm now here in the studio with my guest Oliver Meurer from Flowworks. Connected with us is again Aurélien Brelle from Woody Technologies, and we have Spencer Rodd from Squared Paper. Hi guys, thanks so much for being with me here.
Hi Stefan, hi everyone.
Let's jump right away into the topic. Spencer, as an introduction to our topic, can you please explain a little bit what does on-premise or cloud or hybrid deployment mean? What are we talking about?
I can try. So on-premise systems, that's the traditional way of doing things, where a service user would specify, select and purchase a solution, both the software and the hardware, and the user then has to deal with all of the sustaining and maintenance of the platform. Cloud deployments, they sort of take two forms. Cloud hosting, where you just move your software into the cloud and use a public cloud. You've replaced the hardware, but you have to deal with everything else. And probably the most common examples of that would be something like the combination of Amazon, EC2 and S3. And then software as a service offerings, where the supplier offers you both the hosting and the software solution. So a widely understood example of that would be something like Microsoft Office 365. And then hybrid solutions, they're a mix of on-premise and cloud solutions, where part of the operation stays in your building and part of it is moved to the cloud.
Thanks so much. So, control room was asking whether there's everything right with my microphone, so something that we probably need to check in a moment. Thanks, Spencer, for this introduction. Oliver, on the other hand, there is, let's say, a different type of, let's say, external hosting. So in the past, we've heard about the web hosting that has happened as at an external web hoster, so mass hosters, and they're also offering today various facilities that you can rent, where you can get resources from. Could you please try to explain a little bit what is the difference in between a public cloud hoster and a traditional web hoster?
Well, the difference is really, where is it happening? So if it's in a dedicated data center, let's say something like level 3 or the like, a lot of people and a lot of our customers also get a sense of security. They prefer it because it's a controlled environment. They actually know where their data is. Another upside could be that it's easier to upload physically. I mean, if you actually bring hard disks to such a location, you can do that. It's more of a sentiment thing. Public cloud really means, as Spencer, I think, quite correctly already explained, you're basically using the servers like you are at a dedicated hosting site, except you don't know where the servers are. So the difference might be in pricing. It will be in sentiment, how do you feel about it? It will also be in periphery. Keep in mind, cloud services have the quite major upside that additional software that a cloud provider such as AWS or Azure, etc., offers will be available to you in the cloud, and you just switch them on and off.
Are there advantages of a public cloud, and what are those advantages?
Well, yes, there are advantages, ideally cost advantages. That really depends what you're doing. If you have a lot of throughput, you probably find a cost advantage. If you have a lot of storage, you probably will find a cost disadvantage, actually. So cloud versus premise is not a decided game. That actually is driven very much by criteria that concern your processes.
When you compare a public cloud with any other type of hoster, web hoster or any other data center provider, would you say that cloud is always more expensive, cheaper, or do we need to be careful? And this is an important topic.
It is a very important topic. Everybody sort of rushed off and said, we're going to do everything in the cloud. And then they came back saying, oh, it's very expensive because the storage turned out to be very expensive. Things like traffic are obviously very cheap. Storage is expensive. Computing power is fairly cheap. But if you start getting into more high-end computing power modules, such as GPU engines, those suddenly turn out to be fairly expensive. So yeah, it's something to consider and look at carefully.
Thanks. Aurélien, could you please explain a little bit what are the differences in between cloud as a service platform or on-premise sys hostings, and what are advantages and disadvantages?
Yeah, sure, I can try. Cloud as a service platforms are generally operated by the vendor and used by you as a service, as a customer. So, of course, one advantage of that is that you don't need to have hardware, you don't need to do the installation by yourself, you don't need to take care of the updates, of the maintenance operations. This is all taken care of. So this is definitely a great advantage of that. Also, one other advantage of the cloud solutions as a service is that you have the flexibility. You can scale it as you need. Generally, you have the scaling options to start small and then grow the capacities when you need more. Of course, the opposite is when you are operating things on premises, you purchase a license, could also be a subscription, but generally a permanent license and a support contract. You or the supplier is taking care of the installation on the hardware that you or the supplier provides, and then it's here installed, and you have to take care of the maintenance and of the updates of the system. So yeah, of course, the advantage of that is that you don't need to transfer anything to the cloud. You have everything on your premises. You know where it is. You can touch it. But we see that more and more the cloud offerings are bringing more advantages and more benefits for the customers.
So far we have distinguished in between cloud, and that means external, and on-premise, that means it's in my own data center. And we assume that in my own data center I do a classical deployment only, but for clouds as a service platform there are other options, means beside the public cloud we can also go for a private cloud. Could you please explain a little bit what is a private cloud and what is motivating a customer to either go for a public or for a private cloud?
Yeah, a private cloud is a facility that is not yours, but you still know where your content is. You have one operator in front of you, generally with less customers than the public cloud services. So you have direct access to the people who are managing these data centers, who are managing this private cloud. I think the decision that can motivate to go for private cloud, I think there are two main factors. The first one is the sovereignty. Knowing where your content is, making sure that it will not be transferred somewhere else. So I think that's probably one of the important parts. Of course, the other part, probably the most important one, is the knowledge of media workflows from this provider that you are working with for your cloud hosting. You have private cloud providers who are really media aware, media workflow aware, and that will offer services, not only services but product solutions in their private cloud that is really tailor-made for media workflow. Oliver was mentioning before GPU computing for high-end media transformation operations. These are the kind of offering that you now find also in public cloud providers. But if you are building a complete media workflow in the cloud, you might find some more skilled or experienced interlocutors in this kind of workflow with private cloud providers.
I've heard about customers who say they have a private cloud themselves. So what is that? Is that really existing, a private cloud that I have in my own data center, or is it something similar but different?
Yeah, I don't think that many customers are building data centers. Some big ones are maybe doing that, but most of them are renting some space in a data center outside and claiming it as their private cloud space, which is of course a possibility.
We spoke quite a lot about the actual hosting. Now let's look a little bit on the software side. Spencer, what kind of software is available nowadays on public clouds? Could you give us an overview, please?
Well, you could put any software you want in a public cloud and it'll work, because really you're just renting a computer that's somewhere else. But if you want to really get the advantages of a cloud architecture, some of the things that Oliver mentioned earlier, like remote working, dynamic scalability, the distributed reliability, then you really have to architect your applications for the cloud. Using techniques like web-based GUIs, distributed microservices, and probably using some sort of service bus architecture. And some of those are provided by cloud providers. The thing you have to be careful of there is you don't lock yourself into a particular cloud provider, and then you're locked into their finance models as well. So it's tempting to use a lot of what might seem free things that a cloud provider gives you. But again, you have to just be careful of the business case. And as usual with all these things, maths is our friend. You need to work out the cost benefit of doing these things. It's not obvious that you should just move everything into the cloud, especially if you just use one particular cloud provider.
So you mentioned that I can put the software into the cloud, but is there a software available from the cloud? So for instance, a media asset management system, is a media asset management system provider offering his system from the cloud as well?
Of course, but in that case, I would call that software as a service. So really, it happens to be hosted in the cloud, but in fact, from the customer's point of view, you're paying in this case for a particular service. So I could, for example, get media asset management, playout automation, post-production, some tools. And this is very similar to the way you might have an accounting system in the cloud, or you might use Microsoft Office 365 to do your word processing. You don't really have to do, the cloud is one level abstracted from you in that case. What you're really doing is renting access to that software, and someone else is looking after all of the technicalities of hosting that. And they may, where they host it and what kind of cloud architecture they use, you probably don't even know.
I see. So, okay, we have to distinguish in between, let's say, the hosting and hardware layer. The next is the software, but the software itself is still not yet the solution. Aurélien, what kind of workflows do fit best for a deployment in the cloud, or can be sourced as via various software as a services?
So for the workflows we are dealing with at Woody, we see that everything that is related to social media ingest, social media publishing is generally fitting well in the cloud, because this kind of and is generally fitting well also with the business model of software as a service, because this kind of product solution is requiring frequent updates, permanent access to internet, and for our type of customers, it's generally easier to deploy them directly in the cloud to avoid or to simplify a bit the IT security challenges and work to be done on the architecture. And another case where it fits very well to deploy things in the cloud is when you have people working from various locations. So as soon as you have people needing to access the tools, for example, the ingest tools, but it can be also others from multiple locations, from multiple offices, or also from home. Here, it really makes sense to have a cloud deployment, and again, for performance reasons, but also to simplify the setup of this complex architecture. And finally, one workflow where we are doing more and more deployment in the cloud is all the remote ingest workflows, where you need to have central configuration, deployment tools accessible from everywhere. And this is another reason to have this deployed in the cloud.
So I have 1,000 of questions in my mind that are just arising from this conversation that we have, and I have some more here on these cards. But you, as our guest, you probably have questions as well. So please use the chat possibility all the way down in our auditorium webpage. There's a chat included. So please type in your questions. The control room will tell me. Then we can bring these questions to the table here. Oliver, how can one determine which public cloud is the best choice for his ecosystem? And does a customer really has the choice?
Well, yes, of course you have the choice. There is so much flexibility now, both within the cloud world, public cloud world, so you're probably going to end up looking at what type of computing hardware does a cloud provider offer. GPU, for example, for extremely fast transcoding. Not everybody has that. Not everybody has the latest chips. Pricing, huge difference when it comes to storage. That really needs to be looked at carefully. Traffic is not so much of an issue. Things like automatic scaling, when your workloads suddenly go up, does it scale up fast enough? Attachability, the ability to immediately add on additional services like a CDN if you're going to do big play out, etc., etc. So there's a bunch of things to consider. In my opinion, the clouds themselves don't differ that much these days. There are differences, and they should be looked at. I think it's the much more important and actually more cost-relevant topic to talk about. What am I going to do on-premise? What am I going to do in the cloud? Is hybrid maybe the best solution and the best mix for me? And how do I then make that happen?
I see. So that sounds like it was not ever like this, that they have been kind of the same level price-wise. Nowadays that is. Then would you say the main differentiator is the features that they offer?
Yes, of course the features will be different. It really depends what you're looking for. If you're really going to go for high-end computing capabilities, you'll find bigger differences. For the standard, I have files coming in, I just need them processed, and I'm either going to rent some of their processing tools or I bring my own. If you're in the middle of the market, the differences will be on price. The higher up in the market you go, for example, your files get more complicated, you need additional services that you may not even be able to find on the regular market, software as a service, as Spencer was explaining, or you may want to go for a cloud-based offering as software as a service, for example. You will start to see real differences. For the bulk of the market, there's not that big a difference between the various public clouds available.
We both spoke earlier about the other type of hoster. So I think when we talk about clouds, we typically talk about Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and there have been all the others around since, I don't know, the last 30 years. What about those? Is it worth to have a look at such providers as well, as they are also coming up with like virtual hosting kind of cloud services as well?
Oh, absolutely, because you'll find a price difference. A lot of the traditional hosting companies, they've had a lot of competition from the cloud-based companies or cloud-called companies, let's actually call it that, and they've had to do stuff. We operate in all sorts of environments, lots of on-premise, we have a lot of things in the cloud, but we also increasingly are seeing that we're using dedicated kind of on-prem virtual clouds, if you want to use that term, offered by traditional hosters. And they are very price attractive because they've realized that they need to do something so people don't slip away into the public cloud and into the big brand names. It becomes very attractive, actually.
Would you say they can compete, meanwhile, against the others?
Absolutely.
And I think it was Spencer who strived that topic. Someone could be locked in with one of the other clouds. So how do you deal with that?
Well, Spencer's comment was absolutely correct. It's something people are not aware of, and they find themselves in a corner when it's kind of a little bit too late. Well, the way to do it is really to stay flexible. I mean, using the software components that a cloud provider will offer to you is a great way to get locked in, exactly as Spencer said. You'd probably be better off looking for software makers to provide you the service on a cloud. It's the other way around. It's probably easier because that will allow you to simply switch software producer in a much easier way than you would be able to switch a software as a service that comes from the cloud. Why? Because it's kind of integrated in the cloud. Makes it sound very attractive, but that's where they actually charge the money.
I see. Spencer, then from your experience, what would you say, does it make sense to deploy all that software that we spoke about in public clouds? Or what software should be considered to be hosted differently? And obviously, where?
Yeah, well, the public cloud is great for a lot of applications, but it's not really a universal fix, which I think a lot of people have thought it was. One thing is the public clouds, they offer a very sort of take it or leave it attitude towards service level agreements. And they're not really suited to some of the very high availability requirements, particularly that we find in broadcasting. As an example, most of the sort of big IT cloud providers that we know about, they offer a 99.9% availability on a particular node. And if you work that out, that amounts to about 8.5 hours of downtime per year, which, that's fine for my office email application, but perhaps not for the media management that's dealing with a newsroom. So I think it's important, again, do the arithmetic, look at the service level agreements. Don't just assume because everyone says you should just move everything to the cloud that it's the right answer for you. If you want to achieve higher availability than that, then you have to do things like horizontal replication, create very complex software arrangements, and those might not be effective at the small to medium scale. And a lot of media companies are in that small to medium scale, and you might be better looking at a software as a service offering, indeed like the Extreme Fabric system, which takes the scaling and the software licensing costs and starts to spread those across a lot of customers. So you're getting very high availability, but minimum cost to you. The other thing I'd say is that there are still cases where putting two servers in your local data center in your premises will give you much better value for money. And again, it all depends on scale and application. Don't just assume that the right answer is put everything in the cloud. Do the arithmetic, particularly things like storage ingress and egress costs. It can be very expensive to read things out of storage once you've stored them. Most of these things are priced and scaled around sort of IT applications and the file sizes that come in IT applications. In media, particularly as we move to a world of 4K, the file sizes are getting bigger and bigger, and your egress costs can really mount up, as Oliver pointed out earlier.
So thank you so much for mentioning Extreme Fabric. I think we should come back to that topic later on a little bit, because it points also to the question, what about that we do not only need a software somewhere in the cloud, but at the end of the day, as we want to achieve business aims, so we need to produce something or we want to publish something, we need a solution, what is obviously more than just one piece of software. Oliver, is a hybrid deployment of all such type of software an alternative? And why is that? And how would that look?
I think it's, especially in media, it's a hugely important alternative. In fact, I don't think it's an alternative. I think that's exactly where the market is going to go. What does hybrid mean? Hybrid basically means I have some of my content and some of my processing perhaps on premises, and I have other parts and other content of my overall business in the cloud or even hosted. Why would I make that distinction? Security? Maybe I don't want my Spider-Man 17 raw copy sitting on the cloud somewhere. Processing, hugely important topic. If I'm producing, I usually start off with very high resolution, very large file sizes.
As Spencer mentioned, yeah.
As Spencer quite rightly mentioned. And you don't want to be pushing that around the cloud. You don't want to store that in the cloud. It will simply become slow and will become very expensive, surprisingly expensive. Plus you have the problem, your editor might be sitting somewhere. He's not sitting in the cloud, is he? He's probably sitting back in his editing suite. He needs access. So how does he get the access? He ends up transferring stuff endlessly, and that just keeps adding up to the cost. So when I say hybrid, look at your process where you have really big files, which are usually used for post-production purposes, where you have local machinery in most cases still today, even though it's getting more remote. You may want to have the big files that you need for that purpose sitting in the same location. That's your local part. For things that you are playing out, could be just a show reel, it could be dailies, it could be the result of the first edit, stuff that you're not going to ever look at the source file to do that. You're always going to have maybe high-end derivatives, but it's still going to be a preview. Put that in the cloud, because there you don't have the issue of it's too big to move. It doesn't cost much to play it out. It is much faster getting it in and out because it's just a preview. So it starts making sense to say, I'm going to look at my overall process And only once I'm taking that perspective do I realize, well, it actually makes sense to have this part of my process in this location A, which might be my own central office, but another part of my process which goes towards more eyeballs, more play out, more downloads, more views. The cloud is much better at that. And so you split up your process, and by the sensible part where to put the process, you come up with your right architecture. I have some local, I have some in the cloud, and you end up with a hybrid solution.
Is there this kind of general rule of thumb that they can say, okay, everything what is early in all the media creation workflow happens more likely on premise, and everything what is more towards publishing is in the cloud? Or is it because of the file sizes or the number of files?
All of the above, actually. It's true. In most cases, you'll find the big files at the beginning of a process, but then again, you may want to go back to archived material. So if that's all gone to the cloud, you need to pull it back. Maybe that isn't really the solution that you're looking for. It is quite an individual thing, and it does require maybe a fresh set of eyes. I mean, we at Extreme Fabrik, we do that, we consult you, we look at your process, and then we come up with the right architectural mix for you. And of course, the software needs to support all of that. You don't want to, of course, be ending up with somebody having to press buttons to send file A to location A and file B to location B. You want the software to do that. That's why people like Spencer and I are all about workflows, and we keep going on about this, and we say it needs to be automated, and you need to have intelligent workflows that reflect your process, but simply take all the worries of the, where am I pushing what at what time and at what state, that can be automated.
So probably it's the right point in time in this session to talk a little about what we have created with Extreme Fabrik before we afterwards look into some more technical topics. One of the main reasons why we came up with this approach was that we said, okay, there's this hosting, cloud, on-premise, hybrid, data center. Okay, does not matter. What really matters is that our customers are not asking us for a piece of software and a hosting, but they are asking us for a solution for their problem. And their problem at the end of the day is that they want to run a business. So
they need to make money. And that's the point. People
exactly
tend to overlook that. And it's so much about the economies. Spencer's mentioned a couple, I've mentioned a couple, Aurélien's mentioned a couple. You need to look at your overall process, what your business is actually good at, because that's where you're going to make money. And you need technical solutions to support your strength and maybe even accentuate your strength and avoid your weaknesses.
Right. So Spencer and Oliver, we have created various, let's say, blueprints and business workflows based on Extreme Fabrik or within Extreme Fabrik. Spencer, probably you would like to mention one or two of those that we have available for our customers.
Well, we've got, for example, the ability to remotely put media through a process, so transcoding, automatic QC, and we can even integrate MAM systems so you can then store metadata, look at the content. So really, everything that you might do at that kind of what we think of as the left-hand end of the process, where you acquire content, process it, deal with it, and also the things that go at the very right-hand end of the process, so transcoding for delivery, metadata transformation, delivering metadata to platforms. All of those things, they can all be done within Extreme Fabrik.
Oliver, from a media asset management point of view and more from, let's say, this production and archive management point of view, what would you like to add? What type of solution products do we have available in Extreme Fabrik?
Well, one of the key things is, Spencer already mentioned it, you need a place where people can actually editorially work on your content. And that's a vital part of any solution, really, because you'll still do some editing. So making it available to yourself, but then also making it available to your customers, be it for purposes of sale, of review, of approval, just of marketing, whatever. All of that becomes very important. There are modules within Extreme Fabrik which do that, and they go hand in hand. We have, for example, just to go back a little bit on the technical thing, we have the ability in Extreme Fabrik to have a decentralized overall services with a local on-prem part to your Extreme Fabrik, coupled and intelligently combined with your in cloud Extreme Fabrik. So it's the modules, that Spencer was just talking about. Behind that stands the business, as Spencer said, from left to right. You've got to make money somewhere. How do you best do that? And then it really breaks down into lots of levels. What does the technology do? What services and software am I going to use for that? Where am I going to operate that? What is most cost efficient? And lastly, because Aurélien also mentioned that a couple of times, what do you do about spikes? Suddenly there's more going on. Suddenly there's less going on. I've got more of apples instead of more of pears. I thought it was going to be more pears. Things change. So Fabrique gives you the flexibility because it's a managed environment for you.
Thanks. So to summarize, Extreme Fabrique offers blueprints from projects that we did in the past. So things that we know that the market needs as hosted services platform, as we call it. So it's a SaaS, but the first S does not stay for software. It stays for a solution in a data center, in a remote data center that we make available as a service. Aurélien, as we just mentioned data centers, and we spoke about ingest workflows and hybrid environments, so content needs to be transferred forwards and backwards. There are technologies that help us to improve that. Could you please give us a little bit of an insight? Let's do a little bit of a technical deep dive on that.
Yes, of course. There is the first possibility, which is obviously what we have done first when we started deploying in the cloud, is to natively integrate with the storage, the cloud storage providers. So we have native integration with the S3 protocol and with AWS S3, with a Google Cloud Platform storage, with Azure Blob Storage as well. So these native integrations are quite performant for most of the workflows, and transparent for the users once it's integrated in the solutions. For the transfer of heavy files with heavy distance where the latency can be a problem, and when you want to speed up things, you can also use transfer acceleration technologies, UDP-based transfer acceleration technologies. And here you have several players on the market. We are integrating with Aspera Fast, with File Catalyst, with Signiant. All of them now have a cloud offering, and you can use all these protocols and all these solutions also to transfer your content to and from the cloud, and not only from point A to point B as it was the case before.
So that means we can improve all the file transfers, but is there also a way how we can avoid file transfers?
Avoiding file transfer, I mean, you in that case need to do more or less everything in the cloud. I'm not sure to get in which cases you can completely avoid file transfers, but if your solution is fully deployed in the cloud, including the editing, for example, then you can have remote editing solution. Then you can avoid file transfer at least until the publishing of the content.
Yeah, we spoke about hybrid approaches on one hand, and on the other hand, we spoke about SaaS at the very beginning, where as we have elaborated on, at the end of the day, the hosting is more or less defined by the SaaS provider. Obviously, when I'm creating a solution that is based on 5 different pieces of software that is deployed in 5 different data centers, and plus I have some operations on premise in my facility, it's probably not that clever, isn't it?
Sorry, I don't know, your brain cannot hear you very well.
Sorry for that, but I think that was quite clear, and it's also one of the reasons why we came up with our Extreme Fabrique idea, to have this, on one hand, umbrella, where we combine all the pieces of software from our portfolio to become solutions, or even one very big solution on one hand, but on the other hand also to make sure that, avoiding file transfers can simply happen, that everything happens in one place, or for redundancy reasons at 2 places. And as Oliver has mentioned, hybrid approaches might be the solution, that content stays where it is and only the really required parts are moved.
Yeah, look, because you mentioned it, you should avoid file transfers whenever you can, quite simply because you're going to save money that way. You will need to...
Is edge computing a topic for that?
I was just going to say, we've come up with a process called Flow Edge, and that's all about edge computing. People know that a little bit from the IoT world. And the basic principle is really, really simple to understand. The cloud is great at all sorts of things, but it's not very good if you've got really big files. Edge computing basically says we're going to move your big files between your local and your cloud instances when it really makes sense. In all other cases, we will work with, for example, smaller derivatives, previews, virtual files, et cetera, which still allow you to do all of the work, but minimize the time, minimize the cost that you need to have if you have file transfers, and for sure, make sure you have maximum security. So just like in the world of IoT, where people have learned to discover that it doesn't make sense to send all of your data into the cloud and then have it processed there, because there's so much of it, it takes too long to just transfer it. We'll do some of the processing in the factory, in our world, in the editing suite on-premise, and only once that's done, and done means it's approved, do we actually move that file.
So to me that sounds like it's not all about we throw everything into the cloud and the workflow happens in the cloud. It's more about we think about very first about what is my business process. We break that down into technical workflows, and then we look into where should it run.
Exactly, and where's that big file, and when should it be transferred? You know, people say, well, I'm going to do all my editing in the cloud. That's, for some reason, it hasn't really happened yet. Why? Because people have already bought editing suites. They're not going to throw them out the window. They're going to keep using them. In the world of COVID, everything has gone into lots of different additional locations, i.e., you know, the editor now sits at home, so he needs to have access to that file. Having everything in the cloud is a great thing, but it doesn't always make sense.
That means in this particular case, the home office is also, let's say, one of these locations.
That's it.
One of these hybrid locations.
It becomes part of a home office where your editor is sitting. Suddenly becomes part of your environment, and you need a solution that not just is able to integrate that. Spencer already mentioned, you know, the software needs to be cloud ready. You would have said a while ago it was basically, it's not a local instance, it's browser based, and you need intelligent ways to move the data about to where it is needed and when it is needed, and not just move it about. So adding the where and when factor makes all the difference. And yes, you need to be able to just integrate. For a month, you're going to have Mr. Smith, who's sitting in Paris, work with your files, but only the files that he needs, only the parts of the files that he needs, and only when he needs them.
So one of the motto of our complete event is stay connected, get inspired. Spencer, probably you can inspire us a little bit, because let's look a little bit onto the customer side right now. I could assume that our viewers are now questioning themselves, okay, I'm probably a customer, but what type of customer I am? I am the one who looks into the cloud, into a hybrid approach, or I'm more the one who does things on premise. Could you try to give a kind of a general rule and a guidance?
I don't think I can, because really this is all about what the total cost of ownership is. You have to look at what legacy you have, the scale of your operation. Most systems are hybrid at the moment because things like post-production, as Oliver mentioned, is too expensive to move. Or the stuff that Aurélien was talking about, the file transfers, can get very expensive, or as ingress and egress costs, if you don't carefully plan your workflows. And sometimes workflows are difficult to change just because you've been doing something a certain way, you've got a massive investment in editing equipment, you've got a particular play-out solution, those kind of things. Cloud deployment does lend itself to new services where your software and systems can take full advantage of the software and architectures you can get. And also, for the smaller operation, I would strongly advise looking at solution as a service, as we're now going to call it, offerings, because that's an efficient way to move part of your operation to the cloud with quite low risk. Moving your whole operation into public cloud, re-architecting it, all those things, that's a job for a big software team. It's heavy lifting, and it's probably not the kind of thing that you want to be doing unless you're one of the top 6 media companies in the world. Everyone else should be thinking about more of a hybrid approach.
Would you say that the very, very first step should be to hire a consultant and to sit down and to carefully think about what my business processes is, and from there to break it down into, let's say, architectural building blocks, and then to look into how to deal with those?
Perhaps. I think probably the first thing to do is for you to understand your own processes. A consultant can sometimes help with that. But I think really anyone in this business now needs to have thought very carefully about where's my future, what am I going to be moving to, what are the business demands going to be, and create a set of wants, wishes, needs before you engage a consultant. It's very easy to engage a consultant. The consultant just tell you, well, you need to move everything to the cloud. You need to do this. You need to do that, without looking at what your business really needs deep down. And really, only you know where you're going on what the future holds for you. So I think it's important to get all of those things clear first. Probably do some whiteboard sessions, try and work out, and don't worry about the technology at all. Just what are you trying to achieve? What sort of markets are you going into? What is your business going to demand? What other actors might demand? For example, if you're in repurposing movies or content localization, you may have to meet legal requirements of where you store things that mean you can't necessarily choose the solution that you want. You have to do it a certain way. So get all those things into place. Then once you've done that, then's the time to bring in a consultant or a solutions provider, because you then really have the framework.
That sounds like it's not that external parties can help with solving my future's problems. It sounds like I need to have internal resources that have that skills. Is that correctly understood?
I think it's just that it's your business, and really whenever you run a business, you need to know where your business is going, and the person who best knows where the business is going and what you want to get from that business is someone from inside the business. You can't outsource the business existing. You can't outsource where you want to go. It's just not possible. It's tempting to think that you could just turn a handle and there's just one solution, but there really isn't. Because things are changing so rapidly, you have to innovate, and it's innovative things that that sometimes are the right solution. Things that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago have happened because of the COVID pandemic. We've got whole complex programs with large audiences being made with no one in the studio. Whoever would have thought that was even possible? If you'd spoken to a broadcaster about that as an idea, they would have said, no, we'll never do that. Now they all do it routinely. The people that we have systems where we're dealing with 650 outside sources in an event. You can't do that in a traditional way. So you definitely need to understand the business needs. You need to be flexible, and having that knowledge in-house, or most of that knowledge in-house, is a great help in responding rapidly to business changes. And the consultant won't run your business for you.
Oliver.
Well, I think Spencer is absolutely right. I mean, we see that a lot with customers who kind of, they're looking at technology, they're looking at detail, and they're missing the big picture. I would rephrase that, because I think it's so important that Spencer just said that. People need to look at changing their technological setup from a perspective of how am I actually making money today? How will I be making money tomorrow? And what does that mean for my processes? And once I've figured that bit out, and I think that's Spencer's so right in saying that, you need to think about that yourself, because it will also create a conviction. You will finally know, right, this is what I need to do, this is where I want to go. Then you start talking to the techies who can then, paint the room for you. They'll make it look good and they'll make it work, but they're not your architects. You need to be that yourself. And I think people are quite capable of that, but maybe it's our job to keep telling people and also instill the confidence in people that they can do that.
Thank you so much. I think we try to give our viewers, our customers, a little bit of a guidance in I think we can extend this in the coffee bar where people would like to join us for follow-up conversations, other questions, discussions, opinions. If you like so, please do so. On the other hand, you can also approach us anytime in one-on-one meetings and in product demonstrations. For that very moment, I would like to conclude here on this session. I think there is not this general answer. I think that is the takeaway. That very moment, and this is what I would like to encourage you when you have your mind up on how you want to run your business in future, what you want to improve and what you want to change, then please make contact with us, because at least we are the techies that can paint the room, as Oliver has said, and we probably can help you in deciding a little bit on the color. So what about a pink living room? And
innovate.
But as said, I think you need to know yourself whether you need a living room or not. So thank you so much for joining us here in this session. We will now have the lunch break. You can have one-on-one meetings during the lunch break. You can have demonstrations. Please reach out to the coffee bar and to the demo rooms. Ask for the people for one-on-one meetings, and they will join you. And then we are back here in the early afternoon, where we then will look a little bit more into the various processing engines and processing topics. We will come back to the topic about the media management then more tomorrow. Thank you so much for being with us, and see you soon in the afternoon.